here we go. So, hello and welcome to episode 2 of The Scorekeepers, a podcast where we discuss music, art, and much more in a casual and fun look into being modern artists. I am your host, Daniel Farrell, and today we'll be exploring contemporary concert music or new music, that kind of thing. Specifically talking about an article about social advocacy in concert music. But first, we're going to be spending some time getting to know our two guests and their process and thoughts as concert music composers. And today, I'm joined by two fantastic composers who are both involved in contemporary concert music, and I'm super excited to hear what they have to say on these topics. Boom, look at that script.
Wow.
Yeah.
So smooth.
Impressive. Last time it was like, hey, let's just get started. So I'm going to have you guys.
Introduction.
Yeah, I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves. So say your name so people know who the magic voice is talking, where you're from, and just kind of like a little background on you as a composer in all your interests. Could be film, concert, whatever you're doing. To my left.
Hi, everyone. I am Mikhaila Smith. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, actually, but I've been living in New York for a while. I am a composer of concert and film music. I'm a current second-year master student at NYU, specializing in film scoring, but I have a large background in concert music. It's what I did my undergrad in, so that's a very big part of who I am and my background.
Sounds good. You want to pass it off? Pass the baton?
Pass the baton.
All right, to my left.
See, I'm primed for this because we just had class and I had to remember who I was so I could
For our
introduce myself.
Did I
icebreakers,
say
first day of
everything?
school.
Yeah.
Fun fact about me.
So I'm Hunter Hanson, and I am in my second year of the master's program at NYU in screen scoring, just like these other two. And I do also have a background in classical composition. That's what I did my undergrad in. And I still try to write as much concert music these days as I can, in addition to doing my film scoring. But then I'm also in a band called Regular, and you can look us up if you so desire. But but that's kind of how I get my my pop music fix as well. So I kind of like to dabble in all three of those areas.
Cool. You know, I was in a band once.
Oh, really?
And my first year of undergrad, when I was in Alabama, my friends started a cover band. I also started playing drum set. I'd never played drum set before, so you can imagine the quality of performance was not very high. And we called ourselves the Easy Breezy Cover Girls.
Oh,
Of
no.
course you did.
Yeah,
Of course you
and we
did.
just covered terrible songs. We had like one gig, that was it. It was like some sorority party or something.
Which was the
Not
worst
very-
song that you covered, or the
my
worst performance, rather, that you gave?
I don't know, but the worst song I can't even remember. It's that song that every high school band like would play back then. Oh, I don't even remember. It's terrible.
Experience. I've not been in a band.
Unless you're good at it, I wouldn't say do it. Which I'm sure Hunter is very good at.
Look us up. Find out for
Yeah,
yourself.
we'll
performance
plug
and
all your
stuff.
stuff at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, you should
guys.
put. We'd be happy to do your intro music for this one.
You know, you guys mentioned it, but we're also film composers. So I think our comments on a lot of this stuff is coming from a place of being both concert and film music composers. You know, we're not strictly one or the other, even though it's everybody wants us to be one or the other, but it's tough being both. So the first kind of thing we want to talk about is kind of in your guys' opinions, you know, what is new music to you? What makes it new music to you? Who wants to go first with their thoughts? Hunter looks pretty ready.
We'll just go reverse order. So yeah, I mean that's such a huge question that was always the thing that became a huge topic of conversation back in my undergrad, actually, because I went to Northwestern University for my undergrad, and there's a very strong doctorate program there, and a lot of the doctorates write music that is it experiments with a lot of different aspects of music that some people would probably find, you know, challenging to accept as music in some cases. Personally, I was always a huge fan of their work, if any of them are listening right now. But I do think there was one thing that one of the doctorates told me once, and he had a really great distinction between contemporary music and new music.
Man,
and
That is literally what I was going to ask.
Oh, do you have that?
Let's
I have not read the script. This is not scripted. Turns page. And what he said was new music is focused on, or rather, let me start with contemporary music. Contemporary music is focused on, what music is actually being made right now, and that can include anything like, the pop music that you hear on the radio or the film music that comes out with a film. It's that's about the time that the music is being written in. But new music is about pushing into areas maybe not previously explored musically. So whether that's something dealing, with noise and noise art, or something dealing with different approaches to performance, I think that there's always an experimental aspect to music, to new music. So I think that's how I would define it personally.
Goodness, that was quite
tough act to follow.
I don't know how to follow that. I mean, all I can say is that I agree with that. I think in my mind, new music, bouncing off of what Hunter said, is experimental. It challenges. I guess I'm saying the same thing Hunter is saying. It deals with issues and topics and that are probably difficult for people to deal with, for society to deal with, those issues and faces and challenges, I guess.
Challenges the listener.
Yeah, challenges the listener.
Well, you kind of bounced around what was my follow-up question to this, because I saw this debate on Twitter, some of the composers I follow. I guess
where all the good new music debates are.
Oh, yes. Hashtag New Music Friday or whatever. Somebody was like, I went to a concert of new music, and there was a piece from 1993 on there. And they're like, is that new music, they're trying, I guess kind of what you're saying about trying to sort of describe time, almost
right.
Like new music. We always get into the semantics discussion. We did it last time. But I don't know. I think you guys are saying that new music is sort of a quality to describe what the music does. Sort of experimental in nature, challenges the listeners. So you don't think there's any sort of time frame involved in that? You don't think new music can just become contemporary music? Because you could have a piece from 1965 or something like that challenges the listener, but I'd hardly call that new, So it's
yeah, absolutely, that's challenging. My take on that is that I think historically you can look at music that was new music at the time. I personally think that if you're going to call something new music today, it should also be. I think contemporary music, new music is contemporary music, but not all contemporary music is new music. I guess in that sense that new music is something that is happening now. I mean, it's hard to put.
So sort of like new music, capital N versus new music, lowercase
yeah,
n.
Well, yeah,
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of, it's not like a genre per se, but I don't think that disqualifies things that are, made before a certain date. It's too hard to put a date on that kind of a thing. I think, if you have an experimental piece, or not even experimental piece, but just something that was different for the time, from the 60s, for heaven's sake, if you go back to turn of the century with the dawn of serialism, which unfortunately is still considered, radical and new by a lot of musical institutions.
Yeah, you go to a lot of new music concerts and they'll put 12-tone piece from 1908 on, and I'm like, okay, but this is over 100 years. This is not
a century
new.
Old, right? Let's update a little bit, but I don't think that I think that still qualifies as new music of its time. But I don't think that qualifies as maybe the capital N.
Capital N new music. What do you think?
I read an interesting definition of it that, I don't know, someone described new music. I don't know what you guys would think of it. Let me see if I can just get to it.
Oh, you have notes. You're so prepared.
Not really.
Her notes are more extensive than mine.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this person said that new music questions past dysfunctional normative models as a means to generate newer aesthetic fields through which another future, however one wishes to understand this term, may be built.
I love that.
Wow.
What do you think?
Yeah, so it seems like you guys definitely sort of describe new music as this quality of experimental. And so it can also exist in the new music with a lowercase n, which sort of describes, I guess, the time and place of it being written. But new music should also challenge us. Challenge
absolutely.
Society's norms. And so, even something that may be experimental from, like we said, 1908, maybe doesn't challenge us anymore. So it's almost like the music is a product of the time that it's written in, the listeners that it's writing for, maybe kind of because I feel like music generally moves to be more liberal, as most things do. That might incite controversy.
I think, it depends on the context, but I think, in this arena, certainly.
So talking about areas of new music, what areas or aspects of it, really excite you as composers? New things that you think create interesting music. What do you think, Mikhaila?
Don't you want to go first?
No, you go ahead. We'll trade off. It's your turn.
I wish I was prepared for these questions because then I could have, I would have thought of much.
Well, if you need,
things.
for an example, for me, one of the things that I've become really interested in is non-musical aspects being sort of dictated in a new music performance. Over the summer, I was at Atlantic Music Festival, and I took a lesson with Amy Beth Kirsten, and she also did a master class on this because this is kind of like what she's doing. But she calls this composed theater, which I think is a perfect term, and it's when you dictate staging and costuming and all these things that aren't music.
But are part of the performance.
But part of the performance, and you want to sort of control these as a composer. But different than, say, like opera or something like that.
Sure.
It's just like a piece of music. And in a way, Julia Wolf kind of does this too. She kind of does it as well.
Right.
And so that's something that really excites me, and that I find I'm starting to dive more into in my music is just that those non-musical elements being dictated. So that's kind of what I've.
I'm just curious. So, by non-musical elements, you're talking about things that go beyond the sound world, like the staging and the costuming. And that kind of
the
thing.
piece I premiered up in
Right.
in Maine was has props and staging
Gotcha.
and those kind of things.
Okay. So I thought for a second you're talking about like dictating the sound of a goat, inside of not that and I mean that's
control
all.
of the entire performance. And
Yeah. And when I
that's-
visualize the piece, I'm visualizing the performance of the piece, not just the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
So what kind of areas or aspects of music that you guys find to be super interesting and kind of hook you in and you're finding maybe you're putting in your writing? And it can be, more traditional elements that you just maybe have a new spin on it, or you like composers that put a new perspective on those kind of things.
For me, something that I've been doing recently in my pieces, and this is not a new thing by any means, especially not at the venue that we're at here at NYU in New York, which is basically birthplace of minimalism. But I do really enjoy playing with the concept of groove. And for a few years now, actually, I've been trying to get to the bottom of this idea of, what is a groove? At what point is a groove no longer a groove? And how do you even basically define a groove?
Semantics again.
I know it is, and it comes down to I've approached it from a few different angles and a few different pieces. For example, most recently, I had the opportunity to write for the NYU O1 Orchestra in residency with them last year, and they premiered my piece "Burnout" in the spring. Oh gosh, when was it? In March, and that piece was focused on different, almost like time stretching, like a time stretching effect, where I had similar material that was run through a series of kind of time stretching processes, but not in a digital domain because it was an orchestra piece. So it was I was playing with meter, but then also feel, and then it was separated into these sections of quick, fast-paced material, and then very slow, almost like if you've ever heard someone did a time stretch of the Jurassic Park theme.
I love that. It's like this most atmospheric
It's
pad.
so cool.
It's awful.
It's slowed down
awesome.
2,000 times
Yeah.
using this algorithm called Paul stretching, which I use all the time because I love it. But anyway, so in this piece, I kind of took the chords that I was using or the chords that arose from these series of motifs and the first sections, and then I just kind of stretched it out over a longer time period. So that in that case, I was kind of thinking about how does groove dissolve when you run it through these kind of time processes, and can you still recognize it and feel it as a groove?
Do you find yourself manipulating other aspects of music beyond just groove? Because it seems like your idea is manipulating time or the perception of time a little bit. Is there anything else other than groove that you find yourself manipulating for time's sake? You know what I mean?
Sure. So,
do you ever think maybe if I take a harmony and stretch it way out, maybe pitch distorts as well?
Oh,
so
sure.
Something does that ever?
Oh, that's interesting. I used to actually be more engaged with kind of this parametrical approach to composition, where I was thinking of like you're suggesting, where if I'm stretching the time, what's another parameter I can stretch? In your case, pitch. I wrote a piece back in undergrad for solo violin where I really took that to personally an aesthetic limit, where I had the violin detuned, where normally it's tuned G, D, A, E, ascending in the string pitches. I had it tuned down to E, D, D chord tone sharp, and then E chord tone flat. And
did you perform this piece?
I did not perform this piece. I had a friend, Lena Vidulich, perform it, and she did an incredible job. But that was a piece that I wrote based on this idea of, it was based on like walking through a landscape, or rather it was a trail around a lake, and thinking of the violin as a landscape and kind of walking around the violin physically, like with, on a small scale, obviously, but thinking of the violin as a landscape, meaning that locations on the violin became points of contact for the sound, rather than thinking of, it's going to perform this note, but rather it's going to perform this position, on the fingerboard or on the body or things like that. So that was an extreme for me, and I've kind of moved away from that. Actually, I think it's been the converse of that in my recent pieces. I've been really focused on distilling one element of groove as best as I can, so time stretching in burnout, and then other kinds of things like injecting chaos into a groove and seeing if it remains a groove or not, was another idea I played with in another piece. But yeah, that's it's still kind of something I'm working on, trying to figure out. And I think I'm partially fascinated by it because I am in a band and I still play a lot of music in like the popular realm, pop music realm. It's kind of a meeting point between those two. So
what about you, Mikhaila? Some sort of area of music either you're doing in your music, or are you just like, in other people's music?
I think I'm yet to be more experimental in that way. I think my writing and my process at this moment is still fairly traditional, if I can use that word. So I've got to think about that a little bit more, about what I would do to enhance my music or enhance the writing and the experience. And
okay, so push you a little bit, but when you approach composing, is there an area, melody, harmony, your perception of time, meter?
Harmony.
Melody is sort of the first thing that you kind of go to.
Absolutely, it's always melody. Melody always comes to me first.
When you're listening to other people's music, is the thing that you kind of hook onto as what interests you is melody? Is that the kind of the first thing?
Harmony.
Anything that you find interesting in the way people maybe treat melody? Is it something that they do differently, or what kind of catches your ear when it comes to melody?
Yeah, when it comes to melody, it's.
I guess melody's kind of one of those weird things where it's you either got it or you don't.
That's
I don't know.
It's something I'll never be able to explain how it happens, how it comes to me.
The idea of what a melody is changed, in a lot of concert music, and in film music too. We don't have these soaring John Williams themes anymore. What do you define as a melody to you? Is it has to be tuneful, or can it be just like a little 4-note motif, or what kind of things grab your ear to be a melody? That you define as that's a melody.
Really simple questions are really big questions at the same time.
Yeah.
I was in a class with Shamaria yesterday, and he asked us the same question, like simple questions. What is melody? What is a chord?
It is really
what
hard
is music?
To define,
What is, so these simple words we use every single day suddenly become very complex, even though we know what they are, we know what catches our ear, we know how do we explain that? How do I explain?
It's a feeling, in a lot of ways. Yeah.
It is a feeling in a lot of ways, I think.
I'm just curious, what's your process? Like, do you work at the piano? Or
you're a
I'm sorry. I'm just
you're jumping the gun.
I'm sorry. Cut me out. You can ask.
We'll get to that. I promise. We'll get to the process. I promise we'll get to the process. The reason I ask, what areas of music excite you is because the next question, it's kind of bouncing off of the last episode we have about memorable film music. But when you listen to new music, or I guess when you listen to any music, concert music, older music, film music, whatever, what really comes across as really memorable to you? You know, what is a thing, the area of that music, you know, the compositional aspect that you really remember when you go see a concert or something like that? It's the same thing that excites me. For me, is this non-musical elements, you know, like watching Julia Wolf's. I can't tell you anything about. I saw Fire in My Mouth last year, and I don't remember any of the music. I remember that there was like a sewing machine sound that she used.
Oh yeah.
But I don't really remember like the music at all, really. But I remember like the spectacle of being in that room, you know, with everybody's these giant scissors and stuff like that, and you know, because I'd never really seen anything like that be used in a piece before, and that is what stuck with me. And nowadays, when I'm seeing a lot of pieces that are, to quote Amy Beth, composed theater, that is the area that I'm really latching onto. Right. And it's sort of changes my idea of composing a little bit, because now I'm like, when you squander away like 8 hours and you're like, this is the perfect melody. And it's like, okay, but you know, like people kind of don't remember that stuff. And so I'm trying to think like, you know, what things in my music can I do so that I create like a really memorable experience for the listener. And that is why I keep on coming back to these like theatrical elements, because when I see a piece, like I remember the performance, I don't really remember the specifics of the performance, you know.
That's a really interesting insight into, I think, how we perceive art in general. You know, it leaves more of an impression. We don't remember it verbatim. You know, we don't remember. It's not like we can rewind our memories and remember, oh, that's how that melody went, or you know, oh, that's that thing. We get an impression of what the whole was, you know, or maybe what the sections were. And I agree with the Julia Wolf piece. Fire in My Mouth was so incredible, partially because it was such a spectacle. Because I mean, she really pulled out all the stops with, like, the sewing machine sounds like you were talking about. She had the giant scissors at one point that all of the
children coming down the
aisle. Children coming down. Yeah. It wasn't theater per se, but it certainly was theatrical. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, what stands out in a concert, I think I have to agree with you. I think that the spectacle has become a facet of contemporary classical composition, just because there is more willingness, I think, actually, by multiple facets of the entertainment industry to work together. You know, so it was a really interesting collaboration for Julia Wolf, because I think she got to work with not just a choir and the Crossing and the New York Phil and the children's chorus, but also she got to work with all these visual artists and costumers and people, and it becomes, I mean, it's not dissimilar from what we do with film. You know, we're collaborating with a director who has a vision, we're collaborating with a sound designer, you know, even if indirectly. Definitely in a way we're collaborating with the actors, you know, through the screen, because we're trying to elevate their performance.
What was interesting when I was listening to that lecture by Amy Beth about that composed theater stuff, and I was thinking about that Julia Wolf piece, is what a lot of these, and there are many other composers that are doing this today about this like composed theater things, is that they're very frequently not collaborating, and that's kind of the thing that they're doing is they're doing all this on their own, which I don't necessarily think is like the best, you know, thing. You know, especially coming from that film music perspective, I think collaboration is super important and ultimately leads to having a better performance. And like Julia Wolf kind of like half and half sits on that, because a lot of that piece was like she hired like that stage manager and all those things, and costume designer and stuff. So a lot of that, you know, wasn't her. So she kind of halfway sits on it, you know, because it's not entirely her. It is somewhat of a collaborative thing. It is more actually closer to like opera than it would be just a single sort of piece of art music, new music. Yeah,
and you also, I think you give up your ego a little bit when you collaborate, which is, I think, an important part of the creative process. Is you have to, you know, remove yourself from the equation every now and again, and in that way you discover. I mean, I think you discover a lot of beauty by doing that.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mikhaila? What do you remember when you see a performance of new music?
I'm unable to think on the spot right now. Maybe I can blame my jet lag or my fatigue.
Like,
I don't know. I just
what was the last concert you saw?
The Grieg Piano Concerto. So I'm very, I guess.
It's okay.
Very traditionally in that sense.
Dude, I'm not a huge experimentalist with my music.
Yeah, I'm not. So I wish I could say something extraordinary and something experimental, but I'm still very I guess,
And
in
that
love
is
with that
also
world.
truly a part of new music. In my opinion, I think new music, my definition might be a little different than, say, Hunter's. I don't necessarily think that experimentation has to be a part of new music. For a lot of my concert music is totally traditional. I got that string quartet #1, cello sonata #1 in G major, and it's in G major. And I don't necessarily think experimentation has to be. Even when I experiment with those theatrical elements, the music, it's totally normal music. There's not any sort of like weird experimental, like this piece I premiered in the summer. Yeah, there's props and all this stuff, but it's literally just like me channeling my inner like Copeland hoedown. That's all it is. So it's very normal music. It's so I don't think experimentation has to be. So if you're coming from that non-experimental background, same as me in many respects.
Yeah.
What you might remember from concerts not necessarily have to be experimental.
Yeah. I think for me, what's always memorable is, I guess, an extraordinary moment in harmony that completely captures me in a moment, and that's just a feeling.
Yeah.
I would really know how to define that in any sort
Feeling
of.
is so interesting. Like those moments, the goosebump moments. That's what I kind of like.
Like I watched the Greek piano concerto, and there's just one moment in the second movement that I'm completely obsessed with. I don't know how to explain it, but it happens, it's there, and I wait for it, and it's like I'm flying and then I'm falling, and it's harmony that does that, I think.
And it seems like you're also remembering the emotional impact that it has on you, like the feeling that the piece of music gives you, which is like this indescribable quality, like you're saying, like it's not this.
So I guess
thing.
a lot of my experiences and the moments that capture me are just beyond my words and beyond my explanation. So I think that's why I struggle to define the feelings I feel in the moment, because they just
and that's super
happen
powerful,
at the moment,
and not every composer I think can do that, can instill an emotional response from the audience and these feelings that the audience have, like you said, and they can come from all different areas, like melody can give you that, harmony can give you that, timbre can give you that, but it is like its own thing of being able to make people just feel something at a specific moment, because there are a lot of pieces that don't make, and it's different for everybody, but there's a lot of pieces that don't give me any sort of catharsis, as a lot of people say. You have a catharsis listening to this piece of music, and some pieces just don't do that, and kind of sometimes they're not very memorable for that reason. Sometimes those pieces of music where you're just like, the impact it has on you, feeling that it gives you, like you say, you remember that part of it. So and when you're composing, is that something you're conscious of, trying to instill feelings into people, or does that just kind of happen?
I think as composers, we want to, I guess as a composer, I'd want to move people. And I think it just happens. I mean, it's at the back of my mind, but yeah, I think.
You kind of talked about this because you're in a band, but what areas of music outside of the concert realm maybe influence your writing? And if there isn't outside of the concert realm, that's cool too. I definitely had that like concert upbringing, other than that one stint I was in a cover band. Not too much like outside influence. But I mean, Hunter, do you want to lead on this? Because obviously you were talking about that band and the whole like, groove aspect.
That band. That band. Yeah. So being in a band has always kind of been a part of my, I mean, if not a part of my life, a part of the life I want. I mean, even back in middle school, there's a very embarrassing video on YouTube.
We got to put that in the description.
I shouldn't have said, but
you got to send me that link.
It is because violin was the first instrument I ever learned how to play, and I also play guitar. I didn't learn guitar until maybe a year and a half after I started playing violin, and never. Well, I took some lessons, but I never studied classical guitar or anything like that. But I was always really into rock music. I had this huge like 80s hair metal phase that back in middle school, which sounds so anachronistic, being a kid growing up in the 2000s. But even so, I was really into bands like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin, and Guns N' Roses was a huge one. So my orchestra director had an electric violin, and I couldn't get enough of it. She'd bring it in every couple of weeks or so, and she'd bring in like an effects pedal as well, and I'd plug it in. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, this is awesome!" And everyone else was looking at me like I'm totally insane, but like it's like jamming out on this violin. And it's like I'm sure it was screechy as all hell, but like still, it was a blast. And I remember for the variety show near the end of the year, our orchestra director thought it'd be a fun idea to do Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses as an orchestra, but I would lead on electric violin. And I got so big-headed about it. It was I had a little bit of an ego back in middle school, and I remember I dressed up in a big black wig. Yeah, this is the video.
You better send me that video.
Big black wig, and like a torn shirt and like ripped jeans and these boots that were my mom's and like I basically was trying to look like Slash, the guitarist from Guns N' Roses, and I'm up on that stage, and like the video's on there. Maybe if you're lucky, I'll let you see it. But it's kind of a defining moment because that was actually a pretty early like meshing, of those two worlds of like the concert world and then the pop rock music kind of thing. So that just kind of continued. I was in a couple of like small bands back in high school and. Always kept playing guitar. And then now currently I'm in this band with some friends from undergrad called Regular. And we have an album out on Spotify and we're working on our next one, which I'm not sure when that'll come out. Hopefully very soon.
Where'd the name come from?
Regular? Oh boy.
Is that another story?
No, it's not. It's
stories galore.
An anti-story actually, because the whole point was for some reason it was someone's idea to have a band name that had nothing to do with anyone in the band.
I was going to ask whether someone's named Greg.
Right, that's just it. There is absolutely no one named Greg. None of our first names nor our middle names nor our last names are Greg. We thought that's perfect. It's weird and it's stuck, and so that is. Not a great story, but that's the story nonetheless. So anyway, to sum up, it's always kind of been there as a musical influence, whether I recognized it as related to my concert music stuff or my film music stuff or not. The guitar has always been in my room, and it's a lot of what I listen to. I really don't listen to. This might be different from you two, and I'd be curious to hear it. But like the music I listen to on a daily basis is really not. I really don't listen to film music or classical music very much at all. I told you at the beginning I'm listening to Tool right now because they just got released on Spotify. I was listening to the Nine Inch Nails a little while ago. I've kind of been on this like heavy dark rock kind of kick recently, but that's kind of a part of my my thing, I guess. And I'm honestly not entirely conscious of how it makes its way into my music, but I
think it does. I mean, based on the concert that I've heard of Burnout, I think it definitely does.
Sure, yeah.
What about you, Mikhaila?
Well, I grew up believing I was a Disney princess, so I think my earliest...
You are a Disney princess. You own that.
Thank you. My earliest musical memory, I think my earliest influences have to go back to those films, so it's always been film music. I just remember growing up listening to the music of Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Lion King and Hercules and Beauty and the Beast and singing those songs wherever I went. And so I think that was really Alan Menken as a composer was, I think, my earliest
Did you ever
influence.
sort of expand from the Disneys to like other like musicals, or is it strictly like the animated?
I think the animated. I think that's really my earliest memory. So I think, to answer your question, outside of concert music, it's always been film music for as long as I can remember. I think it's really all I listen to, concert music, film music, and then also a bit of jazz, actually. My dad is a guitarist. He can't read a note of music. He plays by ear, but he's absolutely fantastic. So I kind of grew up with his music around me. So I don't know if I can say I'm heavily it's apparent in my music, but I am influenced by jazz a lot. So I think those are the two other things, really, just film music, jazz.
Yeah, I remember you were scoring a scene, like rescoring a scene from a Woody Allen movie last semester, I think, and I remember I was talking to you about it, and you were just so enamored with like the flow of the scene, and I don't know. It's more of a comment, I guess, than a question. But like, it was just, I thought you had done a really beautiful jazz score for that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I didn't really think about that, but I did write something influenced by jazz in some way or another. But thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I sang in a choir. So
really?
Yes, I did. I was in a choir for.
Are you an Erica Whitacre like super fan?
I mean,
that answers my question.
I can say that. So I think that was another part of me, a part of my musical journey. I was in a choir for basically a large portion of my life. So I think that's also another.
Do you write a lot of vocal music?
I've written a few things, and I think I recently wrote an aria based on Shakespeare text. So I do enjoy working with working with the voice.
And you feel
and
comfortable
working with text, absolutely.
You see, like, that's something I'm still like, you know, like, not so much with art songs. I've written quite a few art songs, but like choral stuff, you know, I'm still like,
Yeah, choral stuff can be, yeah.
you know, it's like the total opposite of I mean, it was like the band and choir rooms were like sacred areas that nobody touched if they weren't in one, you know, you couldn't go in the choir room. So, you know.
That's a whole nother conversation. It's the divisions,
Yes, I do.
It's weird how every other person sees these influences in you, but you yourself like don't ever really like think about marching band music when I'm like writing. But I've had so many people that've been like, you know, what are you in marching band? I'm like, yeah, and they're like, because like the percussion part, I was like, that's a marching drumline thing, and I was like, I didn't even like think of that, or you know, like these theatrical things, like with drum corps, like theatrical elements. People are like, you know, you're into drum corps marching band. I'm like, yeah, and they're like, I can totally hear it, you know, in your music. I'm like, cool, because I can't, you know.
Yeah, we are kind of blind to our own influences.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just it.
Fascinating.
I think I'm also just I'm influenced by a lot of other art forms. I think influence my writing. I've always been drawn to text, to literature, to paintings. I feel like whenever I write, I'm always trying to draw some energy from something outside of the realm of music.
Painting has always been like the composer's like other thing, you know, historically.
Yeah.
Like all these great composers are like, yeah, I paint too, you know, or something like that. So do you paint or you just...
Oh, no, I'm just saying I
just
draw inspiration from a lot of other art forms.
Do you remember, I don't remember her name, but do you remember that composer that came in at...
Anna Klein.
Anna Klein, yes.
So, no, she stood out for me. For me, she was...
Immediate. You must be talking about it.
No,
I got her tattooed on my arm.
Because I felt like I could really relate to her and her process.
I loved her.
Like, I wrote my...
painting thing.
What do we have to do?
The blog post.
The blog post.
Those days.
Yeah, so
At Julia Wolf.
I could relate to her a lot, her process.
Wait, off record.
Yeah.
Who is she again? What did she?
She was the one that she like would like have that whole big painting along the wall.
So she first painted her like she. What did she do again? She
painted
her entire composition and like a ribbon.
But it was also like a back and forth. You know, like she would edit the painting like as she's composing.
I must have missed that day. I don't remember this at all.
Her ribbon represented
Sign and dash that day.
her thematic idea that would come back and go through things and develop.
Yeah,
she was from England, was she?
Yeah, I totally
remember her quite beautiful British
Yes.
accent.
I must have just missed.
I must admit.
It's so funny when I hear people that have, because you have like, you know, like because you're from South Africa, you have like the British kind of influenced accent, like, and then you put on like what you think is a British accent, and it's like there is a difference.
Is it quite convincing?
Yeah.
True.
Yeah,
my dad people over the phone are like, "Are you from Scotland? Or are you from South Africa?" Like they just have no idea like where he's from. He's from Yorkshire, but like that accent, nobody knows like what that accent is. And now we're going to talk about what you wanted to talk about like 30 minutes ago.
Sorry,
what is your process for composing? So just kind of walk us through how you approach composing.
First, I cry a lot.
Oh, yes.
I mean, don't we all?
Crying.
Sitting in a fetal position in the corner, you know, waiting for inspiration.
What I will say is it depends greatly on what I'm trying to write, I think. And I haven't like thought about this until just now, honestly. You know, if I'm writing a film score, I'm almost always at the piano or more likely the MIDI keyboard at my desk when I'm writing for a film, and that's kind of how I work there. But when I'm writing songs with my band, that's all the guitar. I almost never touch the piano for that. And then for a classical piece, it's kind of somewhere in between. Sometimes it's kind of a combination of piano and the guitar. But like I usually actually start with like broad form that I try to fill in.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have this big 11 by 17 notebook, or it's not a notebook, but it's a sketch pad that I will make notes on or draw large like boxes that I then kind of fill with like ideas. More often than not, the end result is nothing like like what I set out on this box. But it's a good It's a good way for me to like throw my ideas onto a piece of paper and kind of see how they look visually. before I start to come up with any musical ideas. Because I like to think of like a concept first, I guess, before I dive in. But that's very different with film music, because with film music, the concept is kind of provided.
Yeah. Okay. So what is your process for and if it's different for film and stuff, that's cool. That was actually one of the further questions, was if it's different for film music. But yeah, just talk in general.
Yes, I think with film music, you're provided with that context. You have the scene in front of you, so that process is. I think I'll speak about my concert music process then, or maybe it's just the same for both, really. Okay, just rewind. My process, my compositional process. I feel like every experience is so different depending on what I'm writing or what I'm writing for. I think, okay, well, if you were to open up my phone and go to my voice notes, you'll probably hear me walking down a street with a lot of cars and people around me, humming something I just heard in my mind. So it always starts with some form of a melody coming to me. And I think I'm lucky in a sense that it's never forced. It always just comes to me. And I take that melody, and because I'm a pianist and I'm most comfortable at the piano, I go straight to the piano. It's where I establish all of my ideas, where I establish my harmony. And I sit there and I kind of put my hands on the keys.
So it's a sort of tactile.
Something happens, and I play around, and things happen. And it's where I establish my harmony. Then I start thinking about orchestration, and yeah, I think I remember someone saying that what we do is a very complex combination of instinct and intellect. I think for me, it always starts with instinct. And then I'm able to take out my toolbox and.
That's really interesting, because I think I'm kind of the reverse of that. Like
that is so. It's
yeah. When you said
it's different,
yeah, you're right. When I started explaining, you were just like, that is interesting. I'm like, well, yeah. but yeah, because I start with the kind of like the formula, even though the formula, like I said, doesn't usually carry through. I start with something that looks like a formula, and then kind of instinct takes over from there, and I mess it up, until it becomes the piece.
That's really cool, because then I start with instinct, and then I
And is both of those processes that you described the same or different with when you approach film music? And both of you kind of spoke to that, the concepts kind of provided, but the actual writing process, is that sort of the same for both of you for film, or is it different, when you approach film music?
It definitely feels different. I think whether or not, the gears that are turning are the same gears or not, I'm not in the same headspace when I'm working on a film that I am when I'm working on a concert piece. I think because in a lot of ways, I think a concert piece is a lot scarier.
Yes.
Because you are kind of floating in an ocean by yourself, with nothing to hold on to. Whereas with the film is kind of a life raft, that you can be like, when you're stuck, you can always watch the film, and that's kind of your at least your initial wellspring of inspiration. But with a concert piece, it's almost like it's coming out of thin air, sometimes. Yeah, how that affects the process, though, I'm not sure.
You're right. It certainly does feel like the experience is different. It feels different. But in terms of process, it just depends on context, the scene, what you're working with, and every time it's different. So
yeah, do you think you have multiple processes for film just by itself?
It's probably variations of.
Yeah, because I say the same thing. I think it's like, it depends on the film and depends on what I've been given and what I want to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. For me, like you're saying, it's a different headspace. That when I approach film music, it is, a life raft. You're just like, and I don't want to say that it's reactionary composing. I don't want to say that I'm reacting. I'm exclusively writing a reaction to what I'm seeing. There is sort of a visual audio sort of counterpoint, I guess. Personally, when I'm writing film music, I'm always writing in a DAW with a keyboard, and it's sort of like a tactile approach. And I took piano lessons, but I would not say that I'm a pianist by any stretch of the means. So, it is tactile for me, like a tactile way of composing. And I guess music comes much more out of me. I don't know how to say it. It's not an sort of intellectual process for me writing film music.
No, I agree.
The only sort of intellectual kind of thing is the more like sound designy aspects of the music that come in and mix and things like that.
Right.
But when I'm writing concert music, it's totally different headspace. It's like you said, like it's all on you. Like, film music, I'm like, probably this is going to get turned way down anyway, in the mix, and like you're not really going to hear it and whatever. It doesn't matter that much. It does matter, but concert music, it's it, and so you've kind of got to supply the concept, you got to follow through with it, you got to give all the details. And to me, like the first thing in my process for writing concert music is I just like sit there. I look like I'm dead or something, but I'm just thinking. And there's be days where, I'm like, oh, I had a really productive day. I like walked around my apartment like 20 times just thinking, and it's just finding that like concept or idea that I'm going to then build the piece out of. And I don't, I'll occasionally get on the piano and doodle some ideas, but mostly it's all abstractly to me when I approach concert music. It's very much notation. It's not a tactile. It doesn't sort of like come out of me, my fingers or something like that. It's my mind builds music around this concept that I've created. And, frequently with all this theater stuff, it's I'm thinking of the performance, not just the music. But it is different from film to concert music. But there is kind of like a weird overlap. I'm finding more and more. I mean, I don't know, we've been in this program for like a year writing film music, like almost exclusively, but do you find yourself overlapping a little bit more or still very separate, or things that are overlapping in your composing minds?
So by overlapping, do you mean in terms of the process or in terms of like what kind of material is featured?
Either.
I think I still try to write concert music kind of as its own thing, whenever I get the opportunity to, just like I'm still working on stuff with my band. But I do think that they all influence each other, absolutely. And it's funny because like sometimes when after a piece, someone will tell me, "Oh, that sounds a lot like film music. I really liked it."
That's what I get. I think that's what I get.
Yeah, and it's kind of neither a compliment nor a.
Sometimes it's a little bit of a backhanded compliment.
Yeah,
it kind of sounds
right.
Like,
because
like film music.
Yeah, because film music kind of has this connotation of being somehow not like sellout per se, but like it's
super easily digestible.
Easy, yeah. I guess easy in general, which is when it's not. It's very much not easy. I mean, for a long time, for instance, Philip Glass would not touch a film score because he thought it was beneath him. But then, I mean, look at him now. He's done some pretty big ones. Between The Illusionist and The Hours, just to name a couple. But yeah, I think. They definitely all influence each other, and I'm not even probably consciously aware of all the ways that those elements of my writing influence each other. But yeah, I've gotten the comment. So,
anything in particular for you, Mikhaila?
I certainly think that my music does overlap. I think in terms of like you said, there is a specific reputation film music can have sometimes, and I think it's another reason why it was always important for me to, I guess, use of those orchestrational skills I've gained. And I guess I always try to think about, even when I'm writing film, how to make my music orchestrationally and harmonically interesting as I would when I'm writing concert music. I think that's what I think about, and I think that's the way.
I think I do that too.
Overlap the two, whether it's intentional or unintentional, or
Yeah, I think as concert composers, we have a little bit of an advantage in that we have a sense of the reality of the musician. I guess, which I think is maybe the point you're making with or at least that's what I think about with in terms of orchestration. One way to orchestrate when you're working on film music is to remember or to think about what is possible, on the instrument that you're writing for, or what is something that works in the real world, because often that will lead you to a pretty reasonable result. Because I think it's easy to lose touch with reality sometimes when we're working in, a digital audio workstation, and we can pull up any instrument we want with a sampler, and then we lose sense of what are the fundamental rules as if this were a concert piece.
Yeah, so I think like that sometimes. So I try not to get too stuck in my DAW actually when I'm writing music for.
I don't consider myself a spectral composer, but one of the things, obviously, I agree with you guys about a lot of those concert aspects coming into my film music. But since doing this year of study of film music, I found that when I approach concert music now, sometimes my orchestrations come from a place of almost thinking of that EQ band. Sometimes I'm like, well, this is sitting in this particular range of frequencies, and it's like I don't want something to be conflicting, so I'm not going to orchestrate this instrument at the same time as that. And it's a very non-classical way of doing it, and I don't I'm not spectral in any way, but it's just something I'm almost thinking of the mix of a live piece. And that's like something I found myself doing from film music in concert music, is thinking about, how's the mix going to sound, even though that's not really a classical approach to orchestration, but in many ways it ends up in similar results. Particular pairings of instruments are almost based around, this. They don't call it like an EQ band or anything like that, but that's what they're thinking of, of the instruments that work in conjunction with one another within particular frequencies. But that's like a very film music way of composing, at a DAW. But I don't know, and it's weird thinking of how that works in like an acoustic notational way. I don't know. So let's talk about this article that we read before this.
Oh boy.
So this,
Have the article.
yeah.
I have it on my phone.
So this article is, for those listening, you can check out this article on icareifyoulisten.com. It's a wonderful resource for new music news, concert music news. And the article is called Art for Art's Sake, Steps to Prevent Tone-Deaf Social Justice Concerts. And it's by Alexander Lloyd Blake, who is a conductor, vocal arranger, singer, and music activist out in LA. I'll give you a link in the description for this article. So just a brief synopsis of the article. It's just discussing the ramifications of using social advocacy in a concert setting without really following through that to the audience. A really good quote from the article that sort of sums this up is this is: in a recent review for National Sawdust Log, Rebecca Lintez highlighted the dangers of what occurs when our efforts do not move past good intentions. She writes, "It seemed that the creators wanted to draw attention to a problem for the sake of it at the end of a haphazardly multicultural program and in a way that was harmful even while clearly well-intentioned." So just in general, guys, what were your reactions and thoughts to the article?
I think you got this.
Do I?
It's just your opinions, guys. No right or wrong answers here.
I think that this is something that I have become more aware of in the past couple of years. And it's not that it's a new thing. It's just that I've become more aware of it because I've been exposed to it more, especially here in New York. So it's interesting. I think that you have to confront, if you look at this and you say there is a problem with art being made that addresses social issues, even though it seems like it's actually kind of disingenuous in some way because maybe the venue it's being performed at isn't actually doing anything to support that a cause that would, maybe prevent those issues that are being addressed. And I think when you confront that, you also have to confront, okay, well then what else can the artist do? And what I think this article did a good job of was it kind of pointed the question away from the artist or the composer in this case, necessarily as being the person that was, responsible for taking their art to a level where it was making actual change. And I think that they said, well, rather, maybe we should be asking, the venues that are allowing this art to be performed, not allowing, but, the venues that are curating this art, maybe the onus is on them to take that next step and provide the resources for, the art, the people that are coming to hear or see these pieces, for them, to be able to do something about it. Because I want to quote this correctly, but yeah, the article says, for instance, so many times themed concerts bring lovely music to an audience and turn their attention towards an issue, but audience members leave thinking, I am even more charged up and energized about fixing these issues. Now, what am I supposed to do with these feelings? End quote. And it's that really sums up part of the issue for me, is that unfortunately, kind of the limit that the art can bring you to is that you can instill these feelings in an audience. You can certainly make them more aware, even, but it's ultimately there has to be some kind of next step for them to actually be encouraged to do something about it.
How about you, Mikhaila? Did you have a chance to think about your thoughts a little bit more on the article?
It's a thorny topic.
Yeah, no, it's very, I guess there were just lots of layers and layers of complexity that the article addressed that I think artists need to think about when they're putting on performances that deal with these issues. I think that if you're a composer who explores these political and social subject matter, you're going to have to be prepared for all of these complexities that come with that. And it also speaks about people who are putting these on who are not being directly affected by these things. Just the logistics of putting on things like this, like investing and money and that marriage of musicians and organizations and things like that to think about that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting in this article is when he talks about Alexander Blake obviously organizes concerts. He's not a composer, but he talks about presenting an idea of a #MeToo concert. And he was told that an event on that one subject would be limiting as it only presented women as victims. And he had a conversation with a bunch of like women advocacy groups and like Me Too groups, and they actually, they turned the concert into an event that focused on the silencing of women's voices and the strength that comes from breaking that silence. So one of the things that I kind of thought about is how our perspective often has some sort of inherent bias to it. We're not exposed to every kind of issue, right? Like I'm obviously not a woman, so me trying to relate to Me Too is only going to be, it's never going to be as accurate as somebody who actually faces these problems. So I'm just wondering if you guys had any experiences with composers or concerts that you've gone to where you're like, wow, this is like really out of touch, or hasn't really been thought all the way through, like his example of, potentially putting on a Me Too concert where it's just literally like a bunch of pieces that make women look like victims. And you're like, well, this isn't really well thought out and it's by a man and it's not really, have you guys ever had that experience where you've gone to a concert like that and it's just been like, ooh, that was not good? Or maybe not a concert, but, a piece or something like that.
Where specifically the artists seem to be either out of touch with the issue or maybe not equipped to address the issue.
Yeah.
Well, were you both of you there when Ted Hearn came in to speak?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew you'd bring this.
I did. It seemed like a pointed question. He's probably never going to listen to this.
Yeah.
Maybe he will, and this will be really interesting. But so
don't ever hire Hunter.
Yeah. So it's interesting because he's one of these figures, right? That's writing this music that is, touted as being, socially aware and addressing social issues. And I have a whole diatribe I could go on about Ted Hearn that I won't go into here. But the cliff notes are basically that I think he recently premiered a piece called Place. It was geared towards addressing the issues of gentrification, specifically in places like Brooklyn. And he did collaborate with Saul Williams, who is an American rapper, singer, songwriter, musician, poet. And he's the one that wrote the libretto for this piece because it was kind of a mini opera. And I did not see the whole thing, but I got to see a couple of glimpses of it. And he talked a little bit about it at his presentation at NYU. And it was interesting because, so Ted Hearn is a white man and has not been personally, as far, I believe I can say this with accuracy, I think he said this too, like has not been affected directly by the issues of gentrification. And so one of the big glaring questions is then, is he justified in talking about this issue? Is he doing more good than harm by addressing and writing a piece about this? Or is he kind of profiting in a way off of someone else's misery? Which is a very harsh way to put it, but I don't think it's inaccurate because it's his name that gets put on a project, and even though he is collaborating with someone who is more closely associated with these issues, I think it's still problematic in that it's still got his his brand on it, and he's the one that that gets the profit from this. And so also the fact that this piece was performed at a venue with a price for the ticket that is inherently, prohibitive of anyone, most people probably directly affected by this issue from being able to see it, So I think there's also something about, including or having a place for the, the people that are actually affected, to participate in the art and to, and to have something to say about it. And I don't know if he did everything he could have to open those gates of communication.
Not to jump too hard on the Ted Hearn hate train, but I also I thought the music style, appropriation is like a totally different sort of topic. It's kind of related to this, but the music for that operetta, I don't know what it was, but very R&B, inspired, heavily draws upon that, but he's not an R&B artist and doesn't sit in that realm. And it was kind of like, okay, but do you see the irony here of talking about a piece about gentrification and you're kind of just appropriating R&B into your music? So that was like something I took issue with. But going back to this, you can talk more about Ted Hearn if you want.
I was just going to say that I agree. I was there as well, and Yeah.
It incited some harsh debate that day.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, and I used to be more in favor of his music because I had heard some pieces of his that I really liked earlier. I thought he actually did a better job of addressing certain issues. Like he actually had a piece called
Insert name of piece here.
He had a piece called
That's okay.
It's Okay.
Okay.
Trust me, last episode we didn't remember anybody's name.
gonna
If it wasn't for Caleb, we would have.
Anyway, so Ted Hearn has written pieces before that I felt were a little bit better at addressing issues that perhaps he was a little bit more related to. Yeah, but I think my opinion's changed over time just because I think, yeah, he's kind of consistently been approaching these issues perhaps without the degree of preparation and responsibility to the people that are affected in doing so.
No, I agree. I don't think I have anything more to add to that.
Any other artists or pieces that you've sort
I
of
think that was my experience as well. I've not really...
It's not a huge critique of Julia Wolf. I don't want to get thrown out of the program. But it is interesting that she's been on this trend where all her pieces are about social advocacy of some sort. And I've noticed, a lot of composers are doing this, where a lot of their pieces are about social advocacy. And I think everything is super well intentioned because she does a ton of research. When she talks about it, she really is super informed about these issues and takes the time to really delve deep into them. But I think there are a lot of composers that just pick a social issue out of a hat and go, I'm going to write a piece on it.
Sensitively. And
this article mostly kind of discussed how it affects concert programmers, people who are curating concerts, like you were saying. But I think, a certain amount of responsibility, like you were saying with Ted Hearn, falls at the hands of composers to make well-informed decisions about social advocacy in their pieces. Have any of you written pieces about a particular social issue? I mean, is that something you've ever conceived doing?
I haven't. I think there's a reason why I've sort of not avoided, because I certainly like the idea of using my voice for good in that way. But I think there is a reason why I've, can I say,
shied away.
Shied away. That's a good word. Shied away. Just add that one in. There's a reason why I shied away, because I know the complexity of such a thing. I know how sensitive I will have to be, and to take on something of that enormity. It's am I even completely worthy of doing that, of taking something so sensitive and doing it justice, because I do understand the complexity that comes along with that. And I think we're also living in a current world where everything matters. I mean, as it should. And everyone has opinions, and you need to be aware of people's situations and their opinions and be sensitive towards them. So I think it's a lot of layers.
Yeah,
it is.
And layers of complexity to consider. And it's not because I don't care or anything. It's because it does mean a lot to me, and
you want to do it justice. You want to do it well.
I'd want to do it well and do it justice.
Yeah, there's kind of the question of like, what will I add to the conversation if I were to do this, and would what I have to add be worthwhile? And I also think, I going back to what you said, I do think Ted Hearn is very well informed, but I still don't think that makes what he did responsible. Like I think like if you were to ask him about certain issues, he'd probably actually, I don't know, but like I feel like he'd actually know a lot, of the facts maybe, but that's different from portraying, someone else's experience, I think. And so I think my take on it is that...
And also I remember something about that day, Ted Hearn, and just someone brought up the problems that come up with aestheticizing someone else's pain. I think that's an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, I think maybe something that's more effective, because something I see people talk about is this issue of, there's so many people talking about issues, and I think something that people peripheral to the issues don't quite grasp is that there is already a lot of really good work happening to prevent and assist people that are in dire situations, whether it has to do with LGBTQ rights or gentrification or just like there's a lot of social issues out there, and there's a lot of people combating them. However, I think unfortunately what happens is that someone, like me, will see an issue and be like, oh, well, maybe I can do something about this, and then I will, take up real estate on Facebook, or wherever, talking about it, when actually maybe the more effective thing to do is to promote and elevate others who have already been working to fix these issues. Instead of adding my voice, maybe lifting up someone else's voice, through me, because that's the thing is as a white man, I recognize I have a certain amount of privilege that others may not, and I feel like instead of potentially accidentally or otherwise dominating a conversation, lifting up someone else's voice who has already been trying to have this conversation, but maybe not enough people have been listening.
Have you guys ever had an experience at a concert, I guess other places, but concerts, that you think has done this really well? They really followed through with everything, the pieces were well selected.
I haven't really been to a concert that
does it well, or
Yeah,
does it at all? I've been to art galleries, I think, where the art of the artist is addressing issues.
You speak about art galleries, certainly.
Yeah,
It's weird. I think visual art are much better at doing this than people who pick concert, devise concerts.
And I should probably have a better answer coming from South Africa, a country with just don't put this in. So many political and social issues, and I can speak about our art galleries, sure, but I've actually not yet. I mean, I'm sure they've probably done it in Cape Town.
I feel like I have gone to art. I can't name any specific, but I feel like I have gone to art galleries, visual things where that has been a theme, and there has been people there from organizations and stuff. But I haven't gone to a concert that's done that. Maybe this is maybe getting way too deep into this, but maybe it comes down to the fact that a lot of art gallery, museum type places aren't a for-profit organization. Ticket sales and that kind of thing, attendance is not something that is super up there in terms of priorities, whereas probably a lot of big ensemble organizations, that is something that heavily impacts them. And not saying that you can't be profitable and still be socially aware, but it seems like big organizations want to play it safe, I guess.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
Music organizations are really like that a lot.
That's very true, yeah.
If smaller ensembles, if you run a small ensemble out there and you want to advertise, your social advocacy programs and you follow through, let me know, connect with me.
Well, I think that's actually the thing is there are a lot of small ensembles that do try to do this kind of thing. And actually, what it is also is that we probably don't hear about, some of the
thing. I
groups.
think, I probably, like I said, there are probably people and ensembles who are doing it, but I've not heard of it.
Exactly, because I don't think that they would, if they were really true to the mission, they probably wouldn't be as focused on advertising, about it per se. Not that publicity isn't good, especially for a group, that's trying to do good. Actually, for instance, there is one group that I know about. There's this group called the Vision Collective, which is a trio at Juilliard, and I arranged a piece for them, but they just finished touring refugee camps in Germany, and part of their mission is to have kind of a cultural outreach to refugees. And what they've done in the past is they've had music that they've asked certain people what kind of music they might want to hear, and then they'll get those pieces arranged or have new pieces composed, and then they'll share the stories of these refugees while performing the music that they love. In this case, they were going to more as I was saying, a cultural outreach, and so they commissioned a few people to do arrangements for different people that are at the camps, and so I actually arranged a Syrian pop tune that was written by a refugee called Safarna Al Europa. And although I am not Syrian, and I do not claim that I, maybe even did it the justice it deserves, but I thought that was a cool opportunity to connect and share maybe something, even though I'm not there physically, But I felt more comfortable doing that rather than writing a new piece. And this is slightly different because this is music that's being performed for people, that are for refugees that are in that situation, rather than to a concert for wealthy New Yorkers about refugees. That's a very different thing. So it's not really in the same arena, but it's I was just thinking about it because I was fraught kind of with the thought process of how do I approach this gig? And I mean, I wasn't paid for it; it was voluntary. But and I decided, I don't think that an original piece by me would be very authentic at all, seeing as I've never been to Syria, but I was somewhat familiar with the pop music and the song spoke to me, and I hope I did a good job. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I did a terrible thing. I'm not sure. I'm open to criticism. But
what you were saying was about like, wealthy New Yorkers and, a concert about refugees or something like that. And it's just kind of taking advantage of that topic. This is not a good example of what you should do. But one of the things that was very controversial this year in drum corps was Phantom Regiment, which used to be one of the very best corps. Now it's not so good. But they were doing a Joan of Arc show celebrating women and the triumph of women and that sort of stuff.
Yes, I think I heard about this.
And all 7 of their musical selections were written by men. And it was like one of those things that the internet was like, come on, show designers, do you not like see the problem with this? I mean, you're just
It's
literally
very obvious problem. It's right there.
You're just literally taking advantage of this topic, and you're not really following through thoughtfully. It's not even really well-intentioned. I mean, it's just literally taking advantage of a date and something that's popular right now, but they're not.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's capitalizing on the movement rather than doing anything to promote change or raise awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I just want to be able to plug your things. So where can people find your stuff? Where's the best place for them to visit to be able to hear the things you're working on?
I think for me, it's probably SoundCloud. I'm still in the process of putting together a site. SoundCloud is probably the best right
and
now.
And everybody listening, you'll be able to check the description. I'll put links in for all that stuff. So what about you, Hunter?
Same for me. Like I have a website which also has a link to my SoundCloud, so feel free to check that out if you are so inclined. But more importantly, please check out my band, Gregular, which you can find on Bandcamp. Gregular, which is GREGULAR .bandcamp.com. You can find our album. We're also on Spotify. There, I'll make my bandmates happy. Having plugged that.
Kind of bouncing on that, but any projects you guys are working on currently or just finished, or I mean, school just started, so.
An orchestral piece, actually, for that thing.
A call for the residency.
For the thing. That's exciting.
I think, but I'm not ready to speak about that so much. Just
yeah.
So maybe just take that out. I don't know. I don't.
Still in the early stages.
I don't want to be like, I'm applying for that thing. I don't.
You're thinking about writing an orchestral piece for it.
So I'm just going to say I'm writing an orchestral piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
And you, Hunter?
Yeah, me and my band, we're still in the middle of this second album, which hopefully is coming soon. So that's kind of, that's where things are focused right now. I just finished up stuff for the summer, which is nice. So I kind of have a clean slate to start the year off with. So
awesome. Well, thanks again, guys, for coming in and speaking today. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Scorekeepers. If you've enjoyed listening, please subscribe. Our podcast is available on basically every podcast platform, including Google, Apple, iTunes. I don't even know what they are anymore. Apple, iTunes, whatever. Spotify, YouTube, and many more. For complete updates and places to visit, the best place is going to be www.danielfarrellmusic.com/scorekeepers. I'll have a link to that too. And if you haven't already taken a listen to episode 1, you should go back and take a listen to it. I'm joined by guests Caleb Burnett and Dallin Burns as we discuss memorable film music and summer's biggest hits and misses from the score department. So once again, thank you, Hunter and Mikhaila.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
All right, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.